Hey guys, it's Nick. I'm here in front of the Parliament building in Budapest, Hungary, and this place is really amazing. Of course, countries have their ups and their downs, and so I want to talk about the time when Hungary had the worst hyperinflation in history. Now, I don't mean modern history, I mean all of history, because before modern history with paper money, all money was tied to a commodity like a metal, gold, silver, some other commodity, whether grains or anything, pigs. And when you have money tied to a commodity, there has never been a case of hyperinflation. So unlike the case in the Weimar Republic of Germany that had their hyperinflation after World War I from 1918 to 1923, Hungary's hyperinflation was a much smaller period in World War II. From 1945, 44, 45, the hyperinflation really kicked in just a period of about 13 months from 1945 to 1946. So what caused the hyperinflation and how bad was it? So what caused it was the usual thing, governments printing more money, but they had reasons for why they were doing it based on the situation at hand with the war and politics and all of that. So in the beginning of World War II, Hungary was on the side of the Germans. So in 1944, the Hungarian government was trying to make some kind of peace with the Allies, and the Germans found out about that and they occupied Hungary in 1944. In 1945, the Hungarians and the Germans had to fight the Soviet Union here in Budapest. So the Soviets laid a 50-day siege to Budapest, similar to, I guess, what the Nazis did to St. Petersburg in Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time. So this is one of the 7 bridges going across the Danube, connecting the Buda and the Pest sides of Budapest. During the fighting between Hungary and Germany versus the Soviet Union's Red Army, all 7 bridges spanning the Danube River in Budapest were destroyed by the Germans to stop the Soviet army advance. By the end of the war, half of all industrial capacity in Hungary was destroyed and 90% of it was damaged. And production of key raw materials like coal fell to 40% of their pre-war levels, and bauxite, which is an ore of aluminum, fell to just 1% of its pre-war levels by the spring of 1945. So everything was bombed out, rail lines were destroyed, and what wasn't destroyed, the retreating German army took rail cars, locomotives, and stuff like that, and so did the Soviets. So they basically split up what goods they can take from Hungary. And one parting gift, the Nazis also took all of Hungary's gold. And so this is where the inflation comes in. Now the currency at the time was the pengo, and pengo literally means ringing, as in the sound that a silver coin makes when you bang it against something. So here is a 50 forint Hungarian coin, and it is not made of any silver. Let's listen to the sound it makes when it bangs against something. You hear that? Now here is a Ben Franklin US 50-cent piece that is 90% silver. Let's hear the sound it makes. Compared to, see, it's a different pitch. So by World War II, the pengo wasn't backed by anything, just fiat currency printed by the government. So the government had a choice to make. They can print the currency and risk inflation or hyperinflation, but what they would get out of that is trying to rebuild the country. And they actually did that in the time that the hyperinflation happened. They rebuilt the country to about 90% of production before the war. But it cost hyperinflation and all the misery that that brings to people. So to give you some idea of the scale of this hyperinflation and how quick it was, in July 1945, a loaf of bread cost 20 pengo. 1 year later, July 1946, that same loaf cost 400 quintillion pengo. What is a quintillion? Well, 1,000 million is a billion, 1,000 billion is a trillion, 1,000 trillion is a quadrillion, and 1,000 quadrillion is a quintillion. So that means 400 million trillion for a loaf of bread. Now, as for the US dollar, in August 1945, 1,320 pengos was equal to $1. Almost a year later, July 1946, $1 was 400 billion quintillion. That is 400 with 27 zeros after that number. So the government had to print money to employ people because they needed a lot of labor because of a lack of machinery that was either bombed or stolen by either the Germans or the Soviets. And the Soviets were occupying Hungary. They had a 1 million man occupation force that needed to get paid, and the Soviets also demanded reparations of $300 million, which is about $4 billion today, as well as, I believe, Czechoslovakia and another country also demanded reparations. So the government had all of these obligations, and their tax revenue only paid for about 10% of those budget obligations. So what did they do? They printed money. Now they did do a few things to try to stop the hyperinflation or slow it down, and one of them was a 75% wealth tax. So they implemented this wealth tax by making you get a stamp for your paper money. So if you had a 1,000 pengo note, you had to turn it in to the bank and pay 3,000 pengos to get the stamp to be able to use this note. Now, people got around that by just depositing their notes in the bank and then writing checks off of the bank account. So that didn't work so well. So the government introduced the Ado Pengo, which was a tax bill. And so it was indexed to inflation. And when they started it, 1 Ado Pengo was equal to 1 pengo. And so they used this tax bill for budgetary purposes. Let's say they said, we're going to do this thing and it's going to cost this many pengos right now, but it's not going to get implemented for a couple months or whatever. The Ado Pengo was indexed to inflation so that they would have the money to implement this later on. But people started using the Ado Pengo instead of the pengo because of this strength compared to the pengo. So on January 1st, 1946, when they adopted the Ado Pengo, 1 Ado Pengo was equal to 1 pengo. By May 1st, that rate declined to 630 pengos equals 1 Ado Pengo. So the Ado Pengo was also called the tax bill because you can use it to pay your taxes because it's indexed to inflation. The government would charge taxes to people, and by the time it was time to collect, the inflation was so high that that tax money that people paid was worthless. And so that's one of the reasons they had the Ado Pengo indexed to inflation, so that they can get paid in more valuable money. And so by July 31st of 1946, 1 Ado Pengo was equal to 2 with 21 zeros on it pengos. That is 2,000 billion pengos. Basically making the pengo worthless. People did not want to use it. They wanted to use the Ado Pengo. So how did the hyperinflation end? Well, in August of 1946, the government chopped off 29 zeros off the pengo and created the forint. And so why did that have any value? Because they pegged 13.12 forints to 1 gram of gold. Now, you couldn't actually redeem your forints for gold, but it was I guess a confidence booster, just like in Weimar Germany when they got rid of the paper mark and went to the Renten mark. They said that it was backed by the mortgages and the factory bonds and things like that of the country, which is basically just BS, because you can't confiscate that stuff as a creditor, right, of another country. So the plan to the forint worked, and Hungary still has the forint today. So who were the winners and losers here? People who had jobs that gave them foreign currencies, factories that could export goods from here without using imported goods that they had to pay for in hard currencies from other countries did well. Factory workers, their real wages declined by like 85%. However, some of their pay started to become measured in calories. So the workers would get more calories and more food than, say, the white-collar workers who didn't expend as much energy as the hard-working factory people. So yeah, at some point, factories would trade their goods with farms for food to pay the workers. So the decline in wages is hard to measure because they did get paid in food in some cases. As for asset classes, things like stocks and real estate plummeted because of the lack of confidence in the economy. I don't know if foreigners were able to come here and scoop up some of these beautiful buildings for cheap prices with US dollars or other currencies. But what did do well, of course, like in Weimar Germany, was gold, silver, and farms. So the gold and silver is obvious because it's been known as money for thousands of years. The farms, not everybody realizes that, but farms do well during hyperinflation because they are the setters of the prices for the goods, right? That's something that you cannot go without. So the farmers make sure they get their money, whether they take pengos or they say, screw pengos, we only want ADA pengos, or we only want silver or gold or foreign currencies or furniture and goods and things like that, machinery, anything. They get to determine how they get paid. And so they usually end up pretty well because they're able to pay off whatever mortgage they have on their farm or machinery or anything like that with these inflated dollars. Banks, on the other hand, and creditors do really bad because their loans are fixed, and so the value of those loans get inflated away to nothing. So while farms were good, things like factories were risky, again, because if you had to import materials paying foreign currencies, you were out of luck by the time you completed your product, sold it off, and had to rebuy the raw materials. You could not afford it anymore. However, if you're exporting things like coal or something like that to other countries and getting foreign currency, then you do well. But if you import some stuff, make your product, and then sell it and have to buy it again, so inflation got so bad, at one point it took only 15 hours for prices to double. So if you're a factory owner and you have to reorder 15 hours later and the prices are double, your business is not going to do very well or shut down. It also at one point took only 4 days for the pengo to lose 90% of its value. Oh, and by the way, where did Hungary get that gold to back the new forint with? Well, coincidentally, the US just happened to take over Germany's stockpile of gold, and they were nice enough to return Hungary's gold so that they can theoretically back the forint with it. So guys, what's the takeaway from this story here? Well, in times of inflation or hyperinflation, real things do well, things like gold and silver, although they really aren't doing that well right now. But they will have their day in the sun if things get darker in the US in terms of inflation. And that doesn't mean you should go out and put all your money into gold and silver, because while things are going good, products that are financial products, meaning stocks, bonds, leveraged real estate where you're only putting up 20% or something like that, do a lot better than physical things like gold and silver and maybe farms. But you should always have some amount of gold, silver, maybe some real estate. I don't know if you can't just buy a farm. It's not so easy. You can't click on it and own a farm and go to sleep. Maybe that's a good idea for the future. Yeah, so real things do well when the money is inflated into near worthlessness. And so the story of Hungary's hyperinflation was a hard time, especially for that 1 year period, at least when it really took off. But after that wasn't that great either, because in 1949, the communists took over, and it's been a communist country for, I don't know the amount of years, probably around the fall of the Berlin Wall. But these days, Hungary is doing great. This is Budapest. This is, you know, these buildings are all rebuilt and looking really amazing. So usually bad times are temporary, and every country has its ups and downs. So guys, I hope you like this video on Hungarian hyperinflation, and I hope you got a few good takeaways of what happens when the currency crashes or goes to zero, as all currencies eventually do. Thanks for watching, guys.